Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something really special. We're opening up a deeply intimate first-person diary of survival. We're going to explore one person's profound search for identity and resilience under one of the most notoriously oppressive regimes of the 20th century, South African apartheid. Now, this isn't just history taught from a distance. It's a raw, eyewitness account of one family trying to navigate a completely impossible system and uncovering some seriously profound lessons about freedom and personal choice along the way. So, start by asking yourself this. What is it like to realize that your very birth was actually a criminal act? It's a staggering thought, right? But this is the core premise of our source material. We're diving into the life of someone born mixed race in a deeply, intensely divided society, a place where the simple relationship between his black mother and white father was strictly outlawed, dictating literally every single decision their family made. The face of the story is Trevor Noah. You probably know him as a comedian, but this explainer is based entirely on his autobiographical account, Born a Crime. And what makes this material so incredibly valuable is its first-hand perspective. It is a vibrant, living memory of a child just trying to figure out his place, trying to process his own uniqueness in a world that quite literally did not have a category for him.
Let's jump right into Chapter 1, The Architecture of Absurdity. Before we can truly appreciate the personal stories here, we've got to understand the bizarre architecture of the laws that controlled everyday life. The author breaks down the essence of apartheid by comparing it to three massive historical atrocities. Imagine the forced removal of indigenous peoples onto reservations. Now couple that with centuries of slavery, and then top it all off with aggressive systemic segregation. All three of these things were happening to the exact same group of people at the exact same time. It was a total police state designed to severely restrict the freedom of ordinary families.
The cold, hard text of the Immorality Act perfectly captures just how far this went. It dictated that any European male having, quote, illicit carnal intercourse with a native female was guilty of an offense. The government was actually trying to legislate human affection. The social consequences of this were just immense. You see, a mixed-race child was the ultimate living proof that their whole system was flawed, simply because it proved that human beings naturally want to connect. And the penalty for this so-called crime? 5 terrifying years in prison. Families lived under this constant, crushing social pressure. There were entire police squads whose only job was peeking through windows to catch interracial couples. If they caught you, doors were kicked down and people were dragged out. For a mixed family, it meant a childhood spent largely in hiding, unable to even walk openly down the street together without fear.
Moving on to Chapter 2, Divide and Conquer.
Now, the white government was a massive minority, so their genius, if you can call it that, was weaponizing tribal differences. The text contrasts South Africa's two dominant groups and their historical styles of resistance. The Zulu were these proud warriors who famously charged into battle with spears against guns. On the other hand, the Xhosa, which is the author's mother's tribe, were the thinkers. They played a long game of strategic chess, even learning English just to understand the colonizer. The government constantly exploited these differences in mentality to fuel animosity and keep the black population deeply divided.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, Laughter in the Dark.
So, how do you even adapt to such a brutal reality? Well, you use humor. Laughter became this vital survival mechanism for the family to reclaim their humanity. And honestly, nothing highlights this absurd humor quite like their church schedule. Trevor's mother took them to church at least 4 nights a week. They went to black church, which had these passionate outdoor tent revivals, white church in the wealthy suburbs, and mixed megachurches led by, I kid you not, an ex-bodybuilder pastor. It's just a hilarious look at navigating a harshly divided world. Childhood mischief was another huge outlet. The author recounts this one time he was playing with a magnifying glass which accidentally resulted in a massive fire. His family famously quipped, "There's naughty, and then there's burning down a white person's house." It earned him the nickname Terror. But more importantly, these stories really highlight the messy process of growing up, making massive blunders, and learning accountability right in the middle of absolute chaos.
All right, Chapter 4, The Fearless Mother.
If humor was the shield, Trevor's mother, Patricia, was the fortress. Her incredible courage is the ultimate example of resilience in this entire diary. At just 7 years old, she was feeding abandoned toddlers in Soweto. By 22, flat out refusing the limits placed on black women, she ran away to live illegally in Johannesburg. And when Trevor was 9, she literally threw him from a moving minibus to save his life.
Her timeline is an absolute masterclass in fierce, independent action, defying systemic oppression.
One of the most profound ways she built his self-confidence was actually through his name. In Xhosa culture, names usually act as a self-fulfilling destiny, but she named him Trevor, a name with absolutely no meaning in South Africa. She did this specifically to ensure his mind remained completely free. She wanted a child beholden to no traditional expectations and zero tribal baggage. She literally named him so he could think independently. In those heavy times, this deep emotional bond and her unconditional maternal love became the primary tool for overcoming massive social barriers. Patricia didn't just protect him, she empowered him. Her totally unconventional parenting methods focused entirely on teaching him that his thoughts and his choices belonged only to him. It didn't matter what the apartheid government dictated, his mind was his own.
And that takes us to Chapter 5, Survival on the Move. Let's dive into one specific, super high-stakes memory from the source that perfectly merges tribal tensions, those restrictive laws, and a mother's fierce protection. Patricia and her children were riding in a minibus. The Zulu driver became violently enraged simply because Patricia, a Xhosa woman, was riding alone with a mixed child. He leaned heavily into toxic stereotypes, calling her a traitor to her race. The animosity the government had seeded for years was suddenly playing out as a very real, lethal threat right there in a moving car.
So, when a hostile system corners you, do you freeze or do you jump? Most people naturally freeze or submit when they're faced with terrifying injustice. But Patricia chose to jump. As the driver sped up, she opened the door, threw Trevor out, and jumped out right after him with her baby. It was a radical, incredibly physical act of survival. Getting scraped up on the pavement that night taught him a huge lesson. Sometimes, true survival requires you to literally leap into the unknown rather than just accept an unjust fate. But her defiance wasn't always life or death. Sometimes it was purely social. Back in their village, tradition dictated that women were supposed to cook, clean, and then physically bow to the men. While Patricia refused to bow to the patriarchy, she would walk right out, speak to the village men as absolute equals, and then mock the whole tradition by dramatically overbowing until it just became completely ridiculous. It was this brilliant, humorous way to disarm oppressive traditions and model true self-respect for her son. Patricia's middle name, Nambuyiselo, actually translates to she who gives back, and her boundless, fearless maternal love gave her son his life, his independence, and his voice. It really was the ultimate source of resilience against systemic hate. A whole government tried to tell this kid his very existence was a crime, but his mother taught him he was a completely free man. Which leaves us with a final thought to take away from this incredible diary of survival. We might not face the exact laws of apartheid today, but let's be real. Society is always trying to put us into boxes. So in a world constantly trying to categorize you, how will you choose to define your own freedom? Will you let the system name you, or will you carve out your own independent path? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this empowers you to think a little differently today.